West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy with Chef Justice Putnam. Netrootsradio.com.
Je voudrais du soleil vert, des dentelles et des théières, des photos de bord de mer, dans mon jardin d'hiver. Je voudrais de la lumière, comme en Nouvelle-Angleterre. Je veux changer d'atmosphère, dans mon jardin d'hiver. Ma fleur sous la pluie de novembre, tes mains qui courent, je n'en peux plus de t'attendre. Les années passent, qu'il est loin, là je tombe. Nul ne peut nous entendre. Je voudrais du Fred Astaire.
So let's get right to it. At a rally in New Hampshire on Saturday, Donald Trump once again used the language of 20th century authoritarians while separately praising this country's strongmen. He also repeatedly referred to the people convicted of attacking the Capitol on January 6th as hostages. And again, said immigrants are, quote, poisoning the blood of our country. Take a listen.
We were like a rocket ship. It was like a rocket ship sent by Kim Jong-un. Just like that. Who was very nice, I will tell you. He's not so fond of this administration, but he's fond of me. And we had a very good relationship. Vladimir Putin of Russia says that Biden's, and this is a quote, politically motivated persecution of his political rival is very good for Russia because it shows the rottenness of the American political system. Viktor Orban, the highly respected Prime Minister of Hungary, said, Trump is the man who can save the Western world. Can you imagine President Xi of China, powerful kind of a guy? They hate when I say that. Oh, you're saying nice things now. He controls 1.4 billion people rather ruthlessly, right? I will direct a completely overhauled DOJ to investigate every radical, out-of-control, fake, crooked prosecutor in America for their illegal, racist, in reverse enforcement of the law. If you remember in Minnesota, Minneapolis, where they took over the police station, they took it over and they burned it down. By the way, what happened to those people? Are those people in jail with the J6 hostages? What happened to those people, come to think of it? They're not in jail with the J6 hostages. I don't call them prisoners, I call them hostages. They're hostages. We got a lot of work to do. You know, when they let, I think the real number is 15, 16 million people into our country, when they do that, we got a lot of work to do. They're poisoning the blood of our country. The crime is going to be tremendous. The terrorism is going to be, and then we built a tremendous piece of the wall, and then we're going to build more. And
all right, once again, I misspoke. It's this century's strongman that he was talking about.
Right.
But again, why do we show this? We always get that question. Why do you give him attention? Actually, this cannot be normalized. And he is the Republican frontrunner. He is so far the Republicans' choice.
Yeah. Well, not only it's getting more explicit, it's getting worse. I am still shocked by the clowns who claim to be media critics out there. Just absolute clowns that attack the media for reporting this. And so I'm saying, you just don't get it. You don't understand his connection with the audience. You just have to understand better. You're actually helping him by focusing on, saying he's fascist. John Meacham, this is very straightforward. Writing it down. He calls the worst tyrant on the planet, the most cruel tyrant, Kim Jong-un. He says he's very nice, that Biden doesn't have a good relationship with him, but he does. Most presidents would take great honor in not having a good relationship with that thug. And then Vladimir Putin, and this is the one that really sticks with me, is Donald Trump's always talking about how horrible America is, how terrible America is. When he's not in office. He did it before, he's doing it after. And he quotes Vladimir Putin approvingly to talk about how rotten American democracy is. He quotes President Xi, says that he's rather ruthless, and praises him, and points to the media and says they don't like it when I praise him, and then goes on and praises him for being a guy that's got concentration camps with millions of people in it, says rather ruthless. Talks about the January 6th hostages. We're talking about people who beat the hell out of cops. And then, of course, goes back to echoes of Adolf Hitler, talking about poisoning of the blood of this country. It's getting more explicit. And the fact that fools that are covering the horse race would somehow attack writers, journalists for recording this and putting it to the readers without an explanation. Oh, but he also is talking about economics that they related to. Seems to somehow talk about, miss the much bigger point that we're in the fight for American democracy, and he's becoming more and more explicit on how he wants to take American democracy down.
We will never be able to say we were not warned, right?
Right.
So we can move that off the table. There's no surprise attack here. This is explicit. It's clear. Just listen. And you're right. People who, I don't know if I never can remember the phrase, or I don't know if we're wetting beds or being hysterical or what it is. But words matter. Rhetoric, the root of the word rhetoric is action. And if you don't think this is serious, I don't think you're even remotely paying attention. And I think one of the problems with the current era is that too many of us, and I've been one too, so this is a sinner, not a saint talking, to say the least, is many of us have applied conventional rules of gravity, conventional rules of analysis, conventional rules of politics to what is an unconventional force. That is, it doesn't matter anymore whether Joe Biden had a good week or a bad week. It doesn't matter if the White House staff is arguing about X or Y. That's an analog way of envisioning and understanding our politics in what is an unfolding disaster. And I don't think in fact, it's not simple, but to use your word, it is straightforward. And my final view of this is we're on trial here. The American people are on trial here. And to the 15-20% of Republicans who do know better, I'm guessing, but who for various reasons cannot bring themselves to ending this, to voting against this fascistic force, I would just say you're a lot richer today than you were 7 days ago, and you know I'm right. You all have, we've made some money here. This is not a disastrous era. There's not economic carnage in the streets for these elites, and yet these elites are making this possible. And I think that insofar as those folks can be reached, please, please, please listen to what your putative nominee is saying.
This is a moment where, at least, we have Donald Trump quoting Vladimir Putin. We have him praising Xi, Kim Jong-un, Orban. We have him referring to January 6th convicts as hostages. And we have him using language that evokes what Adolf Hitler used to say. Those in the White House have said to me, they've made a compelling case in recent months, the Biden White House, that they feel like Americans are not paying attention right now, that it's too early, we're still almost a year from the election, that next spring, after the Republican primaries, which are not competitive, are over, and Americans start actually listening to Donald Trump. As we move into the summer, we move into next fall, it's a general election between Biden and Trump. And when Americans start paying attention again, they will hear this from Trump and reject it. They will say, we can't go down that path again. We can't go down that path again. My question, though, is, as Trump seems, his poll numbers are only going up, both in the Republican primary and now in general election survey after general election survey, he's ahead of Biden in most measures. And the Journal, Wall Street Journal, just now, moments ago, says Americans feel better about his policies than they do Biden's. My question is, are we sure Americans are going to care?
I don't think so. I think that you're going to have a week before the election, maybe 50 million low information voters voting on how they feel the economy is doing right then, that week in October 2024. I think that you see the extremism of American politics right now. You see the radicalization of so many of Donald Trump's supporters who are fine with his most extreme statements. They're fine with imprisoning journalists they disagree with. They're fine with, they think that the political opposition is the enemy. So many Americans believe that now, on the left and on the right. When we become enemies and there's not any common ground worth finding with the other side whatsoever, how do you have a functioning democracy?
I think that is going to be the real test of the Democratic Party, to really say to people, is this who you are? When he stands up there and explicitly embraces dictators and strong-arm people and has them commenting, he quotes them commenting on an American election. If you vote for that, then you're all right with that. I think that's what the Democrats have to say. When he talks about how people from non-white countries in Central America and Africa, he names them, says that they are poisoning the blood of the country, which is as racist as you could get. I mean, what does he have to do? Put on a Klan robe for us to understand that's racist? So, and you're talking about young blacks, you'll vote for that. That's what you think of yourself, is that you're poisoning the blood of America? I think it's not about Biden. It's about who you are as a voter. Are you co-signing this kind of politics? And John Meek, I think that this is what the real test for the Democrats are, is to not make it about them. Have everyone put a mirror in front of them and say, is this who I am? Am I a racist? And am I one that believes in fascism?
It is Monday, the 17th of December of 2023, and you are in West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. I am your chef de cuisine, Justice Putnam. Gunner the English Bulldog is our snoozing sous chef. Precious the little Yorkie is our door girl, and she will be seating you directly for our especially special daily special, River City Hash Mondays. Oh, yes. Well, how was your weekend? It was rather quiet here. I may have mentioned that my grandson came to visit ever so briefly on his way to the Redwoods just over the border into California. And he and his girlfriend had to get back, so they didn't stop by here on the way back to Salem, Portland area. And so that was nice. We'll be seeing him probably around spring break. I think that's what he said, when he said he would be back down. And so there's that. I should probably give a heads up, too. Around February 10th, that's my dad's birthday. And all of us kids are going to be flying into Southern California to, well, not necessarily surprise him, but we're going to visit with him that weekend. So probably won't have a show on that Friday, and then maybe not on that Monday either. So we'll see how it goes. But that, just giving you a heads up here, a month or a couple of months ahead of time. Well, it would be a couple of months, more like a month and a couple of weeks. Okay. Where are we? It's Monday. So, the tap dancing Christmas presentation in the White House that Jill put on, tap dancers dancing Christmas music to Duke Ellington, and set the right wing off on a tither. Yes, it did indeed. It seems so long ago. It was only really just the beginning of the weekend, if not actually on the weekend. So a lot of times when the weekend comes up, by the time Monday rolls around, the news on Saturday seems rather old. And it's not. It isn't. But it was very telling that the usual suspects, their heads were exploding because there were black people and black music. And then they're purporting that, there were transvestites dancing. So what? God, these people are such hateful bigots. God. All right. Little local flavor. This is the time of year when mailbox thefts are on the rise because people are looking for gifts and, cards with money in it and whatnot. So, of course, a couple of people have been hit. And I do feel for them, but it does crack me up that the response is that it's local government's fault. They don't keep us safe. We don't know what we're voting for. It's just ludicrous. We live in a tiny town. And they're claiming our neighbors on the city council and the mayor don't care for our safety. First of all, mailbox theft is not their job. It's not the cops' job either. It is the post office police department that takes care of that. Those are federal crimes. City Hall has nothing to do with it. Sure, file a report with your local police department, but I think you better tell the postmaster at your post office to get the post office cops on the job. So I know I'm going to be inundated now with a bunch of ignorant MAGA types insisting that I'm being rude by saying that they're ignorant, when they are the ones in this post on the town Facebook page says this is what happens when you don't know what you're voting for. And I'm like, how would you not know what you're voting for? Don't you read the voters pamphlet? Don't you educate yourself on the issues and the people? What is wrong with you? I'll tell you what's wrong with you. Or them. Decades and decades of destroying the most basic aspects of our educational system, to the point where MAGAs in general are lucky if they have a 9th grade education. I'm not saying they dropped out. I'm just saying that they're lucky if they were able to perform on a 9th grade level. And that's where we are right now. Get rid of history, get rid of civics, and then we got people saying, we don't know what we're voting for. No shit, Sherlock. Why don't you educate yourself on it then, like the rest of us do? And yeah, it's local government only wants to protect the pedophiles and the tweakers, etc., etc., etc. What are you talking about? God. I got to tell you, it's not like our city council is full of a bunch of flaming liberals. In fact, I wish we were. But it is ludicrous to claim that the mayor and our neighbors in this tiny little town don't care about the rest of us. That is ludicrous. All right. So I await the trouncing that I am about to get for pointing out people's ignorance. Grow up. Okay, what do we have in store for you on this fine Monday? Well, at the top, Trump is becoming more explicit on how he wants to take down U.S. democracy. That's right. I got to tell you, a day one dictator becomes dictator on day one. He told us so. On the rest of the menu, fake news sites have ballooned 1,000% since May, and artificial intelligence is making it worse. Thank you, Zuckerberg. Thank you, Elon. The Washington State Attorney General's office named a new head of its Indigenous Cold Case Office. And health officials have opened a tuberculosis probe involving dozens of schools in Nevada's most populous county. Yeah, don't get vaccinated. Don't. It's wrong. I kid. After the break, we move to the chef's table, where Albania returned 20 religious and secular icons to neighboring North Macedonia that were stolen a decade ago. And New York's Metropolitan Museum of Art will return more than a dozen pieces of looted ancient artwork to Cambodia and Thailand. All that and more on West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. Bon appetit. To the right of the page is the chat room link, and the chat room is monitored by Kelly Lincoln, and we thank Kelly for doing so. Across the page to the left from that chat room link, and down just a skosh, is the link to our Patreon page. And if you could become a recurring Patreon of Netroots Radio, and if you could afford to send us what you might spend on an espresso-type coffee drink, for instance, if you could send those funds to us once a month, it really does help us pay our bills and all the other sundry costs that are incurred running this powerhouse of resistance. Now, we have found over these many years that we have been this powerhouse of resistance, that when we pay our bills, we somehow are able to fly under the radar and continue this powerhouse of resistance. And we have you and your generosity to thank for allowing us to fulfill our civic duty as the founders originally intended so many years ago. So thank you for your generosity. And I know it's the time of year where you're given a lot already, but when you can, it would really help, because this is also the time of year when the more high dollar bills come due, and they want them all. They want it all, and we pay it. So thank you once again for your generosity. If you would like to follow Netroots Radio on Twitter, Mastodon, Spoutable, Blue Sky, Facebook, etc., you can do so at Netroots Radio. Tom takes care of those, except we all take care of Facebook now, I've found out. So there. Oh, wow. You can follow me on Twitter, Mastodon, Spoutable, Blue Sky, Facebook, Tumblr, what else? Instagram. Yeah, we're everywhere. But you can find me on those social media platforms at Justice Putnam, or simply Justice Putnam, depending. Anyway, I post the show notes and links diary on Daily Codes 10 minutes before showtime. So if you followed my social media feeds, the links to those Daily Codes diaries are right there. And then you'll be able to read the actual articles by the actual reporters that we draw such inspiration from here in this salon that we call West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. You know, you can follow the show on Twitter at Cookbook West. And most importantly, if you could pick up podcasts by way of Spreaker, TuneIn, iHeart, YouTube, iTunes, etc., that would be great. So pick them up. You just can't find them on Stitcher. You just won't be able to. Everywhere. You can find podcasts everywhere. Just not on Stitcher. Okay. I'm going to be flogging that horse for quite some time yet. I apologize ahead of time. Or actually during. Okay. This first offering here in the Bistro Cafe of West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy is by Prashnu Verma from the Washington Post. Artificial intelligence is automating the creation of fake news, spurring an explosion of web content, mimicking factual articles that instead disseminates false information about elections, wars, and natural disasters. I would say vaccines, too. Since May, websites hosting AI-created false articles have increased by more than 1,000%, ballooning from 49 sites to more than 600, according to NewsGuard, an organization that tracks misinformation. Historically, propaganda operations have relied on armies of low-paid workers or highly coordinated intelligence organizations to build sites that appear to be legitimate. But AI is making it easy for nearly anyone, whether they are part of a spy agency or just a teenager in their basement, to create these outlets producing content that is at times hard to differentiate between or from real news. One AI-generated article recounted a made-up story about Netanyahu's psychiatrist, a NewsGuard investigation found, alleging that he had died and left behind a note suggesting the involvement of the Israeli Prime Minister. The psychiatrist appears to have been fictitious, but the claim was featured on an Iranian TV show, and it was recirculated on media sites in Arabic, English, and Indonesian, and spread by users on TikTok, Reddit, and Instagram. The heightened churn of polarizing and misleading content may make it difficult to know what is true, harming political candidates, military leaders, and aid efforts. Misinformation experts said the rapid growth of these sites is particularly worrisome in the run-up to the 2024 elections. I should point out at this point that the main roadblock to being able to tackle this misinformation comes wholly from the Republican Party. They do not want misinformation stopped. I wonder why that is. Creative artificial or generative artificial intelligence has ushered in an era in which chatbots, image makers, and voice cloners can produce content that seems human-made. Well-dressed AI-generated news anchors are spewing pro-Chinese propaganda, amplified by bot networks sympathetic to Beijing. In Slovakia, politicians up for election found their voices had been cloned to say controversial things they never uttered days before voters went to the polls. A growing number of websites with generic names such as iBusiness Day or Ireland Top News are delivering fake news made to look genuine in dozens of languages from Arabic to Thai. Reader, I would say Zulu. From Arabic to Zulu. Why stop at the T's? Readers can easily be fooled by the websites. Global Village Space, which published the piece on Netanyahu's alleged psychiatrist, is flooded with articles on a variety of serious topics. There are pieces detailing U.S. sanctions on Russian weapon suppliers, the oil behemoth Saudi Aramco's investments in Pakistan, and the United States' increasingly tenuous relationship with China. The site also contains essays written by a Middle East think tank expert, a Harvard-educated lawyer, and the site's chief executive, Moeed Pirzada, a television news anchor from Pakistan. Pirzada did not respond to a request for comment. Two contributors confirmed they have written articles appearing on Global Village Space, but sandwiched in with these ordinary stories are AI-generated articles, Brewster said, such as the piece on Netanyahu's psychiatrist, which was relabeled as satire after NewsGuard reached out to the organization during its investigation. NewsGuard says the story appears to have been based on a satirical piece published in June of 2020, which made similar claims about an Israeli psychiatrist's death. Anna King of the Northwest News Network, by way of Oregon Public Broadcasting, brings us this next offering here in the Bistro Cafe of West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy, River City Hash Mondays. Brian George has been in law enforcement for 27 years. He is an enrolled member of the Port Gamble-Saklama tribe of the northern tip of the Kitsap Peninsula in Washington State. Now, George is heading up the new cold case unit for the Washington State Attorney General's criminal justice system. I have always wanted to give back to tribal communities, my tribe, and surrounding tribes, George said. I have this unique perspective of being associated with two different tribes and tribal governments. My father served on the tribal council as I was growing up and as chairman of the tribe, so I had that instilled me at a young age on working with the tribes, representing the tribes, and doing the best we could do for the tribes. George comes to the office following more than 25 years of service with the Washington State Patrol. Most recently, he was director of the Washington State Fusion Center. The Fusion Center supports federal, state, and tribal agencies, as well as regional and local law enforcement, public safety, and homeland security, by providing intel and information statewide. He started his career as an officer with the Suquamish Tribal Police Department. George said he is busy hiring 4 investigators and 1 additional liaison called a case navigator to directly communicate with involved families. George said this new group is quickly finding support among other law enforcement agencies that are excited for the help on these difficult and important cases. Well, that's what they're saying now. Usually they didn't consider them so important, so they would never investigate. Chris Loftus with the Washington State Patrol said the 2 state groups plan to meet very soon. He said the Washington State Patrol staff were excited that their 2 tribal liaisons would be joined by more help on cold cases. There are a lot more people on this highway of service to help people that have been underserved in the past, Loftus said. As that level of trust continues to rise, hopefully we will come to a place where we're not in a responsive mode, but a preventative mode. The AG's office said Native American and Alaskan Native women and people experience violence at much higher rates than other populations. George said in busy law enforcement offices, cold cases often get shuffled for pressing situations happening right then. From my seat, when I was in law enforcement, I would show up to a detective squad room. Continually, what I would see when I arrived is tired officers. Half the unit had been called out the previous night and had been there for hours on end, George said. That's common, unfortunately. So this unit will not have responsibilities outside of, our mission, and can really, I think, make an impact on some of these cases. Weekend desk of the Associated Press brings us this final offering here in the Bistro Cafe of West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. A tuberculosis investigation is underway involving a person with an active infection who was on dozens of elementary and high school campuses in Nevada's most populous county. The person, who has not been publicly identified, was on 26 Clark County School District campuses and 1 training site. Before learning of the TB diagnosis, the Las Vegas Review-Journal reported. According to the newspaper, the Southern Nevada Health District released a list of affected schools, and people identified as close contacts of the person were being notified. The district said individual notifications were happening at 17 campuses for possible exposures, but no exposures had been identified at 8 campuses so far. Health district officials said not all who were exposed will be infected, and not everyone who is infected has the active disease, which is caused by bacteria and most often affects the lungs. Tuberculosis spreads easily where people gather in crowds or live in crowded conditions. The symptoms can include coughing that lasts at least 2 weeks, chest pain, coughing up blood or phlegm, weakness or fatigue, weight loss, chills, fever, night sweats, and loss of appetite. The CDC said more than 8,300 TB cases were reported nationwide last year. I gotta tell you, that is a high number, and it should never be that high. Not now. Okay. With that said, let us now go to our break. And when we get back from that break, we will go through weather from around the world, and we will finish up with the stories that we've curated for you today. You are listening to West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy, and we will be right back.
You are listening to netrootsradio.com.
Please hang up and try again.
From a point at sea to the circles of your mind, a new force is at work for planetary transformation. New radio for a new Earth.
Imagine the entire Earth. Now think about the places where all the ground is frozen solid. Do you know where they are? What if I told you that permafrost isn't only found at the poles, and that it exists under the sea, on the Tibetan Plateau, and on top of North America's Rocky Mountains? For Science Quickly, I'm Emily Schwing. For more than 6 years, researchers have been working to account for all of the planet's frozen ground as part of the Nunatsiaq Permafrost Research Project. They're also going one step further to document who lives on permafrost, makes use of it, and what its cultural significance is. What's come of their effort is the world's first and only permafrost atlas of the entire Arctic.
So it's a coffee table atlas that you can open anywhere and start reading and learning about permafrost.
Levi Westervelt is a geographer and cartographer. He worked as an editor on the Arctic Permafrost Atlas.
I think one of the first questions we ask ourselves is what was the ultimate goal of the atlas and what was the audience we were trying to reach? And quite fast, I think, became clear that we wanted to create something that was very accessible from policymakers who might not have heard of permafrost before to children in schools that are interested to learn more in the topic.
What came of the project is a nearly 160-page document loaded with dozens of maps, high-resolution images, and charts and graphs that explain what permafrost is, how it behaves in the far north, how it's changing, and who those changes impact. Paul Overdoen is a geoscientist at Germany's Alfred Wegener Institute Helmholtz Center for Polar and Marine Research. He also worked on the project.
We were looking at natural sciences and social sciences, so we really had to kind of take a step back and get like kind of a big picture of who works in the areas where there are permafrost, who works with people who live on permafrost. And then, we started to look at, well, what's the output going to be?
It's a document Paul hasn't grown tired of looking at, despite years of work.
I just remember being a kid and just loving atlases, like just these big pages, and you turn them over, finding out about some part of the world you hadn't even imagined. That's what an atlas should do. I think it should also kind of open up your imagination a little bit.
I mean, I think for me as somebody that started on this project knowing very little about permafrost, revealing a lot of it is visible, especially the changes that we're seeing in the natural landscape due to climate change.
Permafrost is ground that remains permanently frozen for at least 2 years. And in many of Earth's coldest regions, including the Arctic, it's warming and melting and shifting rapidly. That means infrastructure is less stable, ecosystems are changing, and cultures tied to life on frozen ground are shifting. Permafrost underlies up to 16 million square kilometers of Earth's surface. In the northern hemisphere, 15% of exposed land includes permafrost. Taken alone, these statistics might not mean much. But the foreword to the Arctic Permafrost Atlas notes that in the past 2 decades, the number of web searches for the term permafrost has nearly doubled in proportion to the total amount of searches. In other words, people are interested in frozen ground, and now they have an atlas that can answer some of their questions. They can also learn directly from people who live on permafrost and interact with it every day. Levy says work on the project not only piqued his own imagination, but also revealed what would otherwise be invisible.
But a lot of it is not visible, where it's happening under the surface. If you look at the maps, for example, showing the carbon concentration in terrestrial and subsea permafrost. So these kind of making the invisible visible through these maps, I think, has been extremely interesting.
Beyond the permafrost, Paul says there are other elements to the project that are also seemingly invisible.
What you don't really see when you look at the atlas is the whole process that went into making it. And one part of that is definitely community involvement, community consultations. So, for example, there's a fold out on risks and hazards in the atlas, which is the product of consultations that took place in communities on Svalbard, in Greenland, and in the Northwest Territories at numerous times through the project. That was made a little bit difficult by COVID, but it happened nonetheless. Right up until the end of the project.
As part of that process, the team also incorporated Indigenous knowledge and experience into the project. And Levy says what's unique to the final version are the written portraits of people who live and work with permafrost every day.
What we're trying to do through the portraits is bring a different perspective and a different scale to the story of permafrost. So as the reader navigates between the spreads, they might encounter, for example, a map or a graphic that shows the settlements and their sizes and the type of permafrost they're located on and in which country. And that gives kind of one dimension to the story. And then you turn the page and you get the personal story of an indigenous person that lives somewhere in northern Russia that talks about their relationship with permafrost. So this allows the reader to connect to the story of permafrost at different scales through these graphics that are maybe more regional and then these personal stories.
The world's permafrost is changing rapidly, and the atlas is filled with pages of beautiful, colorful, and highly informative maps that tell its story from various angles. This may not be the final product. The Permafrost Atlas may very well be a living document, according to Paul.
One of the dangers of a map is always, once you've made it, it becomes a kind of a truth. But of course, many things are changing, especially now, and especially in the Arctic, they're changing very rapidly. So this will be a living document, that this will need to be a living document, yes.
The Arctic Permafrost Atlas is available for free as an online download. Scientific American's Science Quickly is produced and edited by Tulika Bose, Jeff Delvicio, Kelso Harper, and Karen Leon. Our theme music was composed by Dominic Smith. Subscribe to Science Quickly wherever you get your podcasts. And if you're a subscriber already, thanks. And please drop us a review on Apple or Spotify. For more up-to-date and in-depth science news, head to scientificamerican.com. Thanks, and see you next time. For Science Quickly, I'm Emily Schwing.
Hi, I'm Tom Hartman, and since you're listening to netrootsradio.com, show your progressive side and go to the donate button on the bottom of the homepage. It's progressives like you who power Netroots Radio and keep the progressive message beaming everywhere 24 hours a day. Just go to our donate button at the bottom of netrootsradio.com. Thank you for keeping progressive radio at full power.
If you thought that courts wouldn't try to further gut the 1965 Voting Rights Act, think again. I'm Bill Newman, and this is the Civil Liberties Minute. In 2013, the Supreme Court, 5-4, in a case from Shelby County, Alabama, killed more than half of the historic Voting Rights Act of 1965 by striking down what's called preclearance. Preclearance meant that a state or county with a long history of racial discrimination in voting had to get an okay, a preclearance, from a federal court or the Department of Justice before it changed its voting procedures. After the court killed preclearance, areas with racially biased voting histories closed polling places, purged voter rolls, truncated early voting, instituted racially biased voter ID laws, and so on. Then, in 2023, the Supreme Court, which has blessed blatant political gerrymandering in a clear case of racially motivated gerrymandering, did not strike down the rest of the Voting Rights Act. A big sigh of relief was warranted. But the Eighth Circuit Court of Appeals has just ruled that private citizens and civil rights groups no longer can bring a challenge under the Voting Rights Act. If that case were to be upheld by the Supreme Court, it would gut what remains of that crucially important law. We await the High Court's decision. The Civil Liberties Minute is made possible by the ACLU because freedom can't protect itself.
You're listening to the American Democracy Minute, keeping your government by and for the people. Last week, we reported on the aftershocks of an Arkansas racial gerrymandering case where the U.S. 8th Circuit Court of Appeals decided voters and groups had no private right of action under the 1965 Voting Rights Act. Two rulings issued Friday, December 15th, pushed back on that radical decision. GOP officials in North Dakota and Louisiana seized on the 8th Circuit's decision to see if they could overturn federal court mandates to draw maps where Native and Black Americans could have an opportunity to elect the candidate of their choice under the VRA. Citing the no private right of action decision, the state of North Dakota tried to stop the redrawing of maps in a case won by the Turtle Mountain Band of Chippewa Indians and the Spirit Lake Tribe. Democracy Docket reports that an unsigned order Friday, also from the 8th Circuit, denied the appeal by the state's GOP Secretary of State. In another VRA racial gerrymandering case won by voters, the GOP Louisiana Secretary of State and Attorney General asked for a rehearing of Robinson v. Ardoin, also based on the 8th Circuit's decision. The 5th Circuit didn't agree, denying the state's request and mandating the map and a VRA-compliant district be drawn by January 30th per the lower court's order. We have more on the defense of the Voting Rights Act Section 2 at AmericanDemocracyMinute.org. I'm Brian Beal. Follow us on Facebook at American Democracy Minute.
I'm Rick Smith, and this is Labor History in 2. On this day in labor history, the year was 1917. That was the day that Congress passed the 18th Amendment, which outlawed the transportation, manufacture, and sale of alcohol. The amendment went into effect 13 months later. According to John Rumbarger, author of Profits, Power, and Prohibition, the temperance movement centered on tightening social control of working people. Workers often met in bars and saloons to unwind after work and to socialize. But in the days before union halls, the saloon also doubled as a headquarters where workers could talk about problems on the job like mistreatment and poor working conditions. They used the saloon as a place to plan and organize strikes. It also served as a site for workers to talk politics and organize around political parties. Many prominent industrialists complained that saloons were breeding grounds for labor unrest and radical politics. They also feared a growing immigrant working class that tied its fate to powerful political machines like those in Chicago, New York, and Boston. The anti-saloon movement brought a strange mix into its coalition. It included the KKK, who worried of the growing power of immigrant workers. But it also included progressives, who worked for labor harmony and sobriety as a means of public health. The anti-saloon movement also targeted German brewers. The United States had just entered World War I, and anti-German sentiment was so high that many considered German breweries to be working for the Kaiser, their product a sap on the energy of servicemen and grain production to feed the U.S. troops. But alcohol flowed freely throughout the 1920s, creating both the jazz speakeasy and bootlegging syndicates. It would ultimately be repealed by 1933. History. Labor History in 2 brought to you by the Illinois Labor History Society and The Rick Smith Show.
Thank you for accompanying us here to the Chef's Table at West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. River City Hash Mondays. We always begin weather from around the world along the banks of the Rogue River in the Rogue River Valley of Southern Oregon on the west coast of the continental United States of America, where it is currently 40 degrees Fahrenheit, expecting highs around 50. Considerable cloudiness with occasional rain showers, which is happening at the very moment. And winds will be light and variable, and it looks like we're going to get about a quarter inch of rain today, with showers this evening becoming a steady rain overnight, bringing with it another quarter inch of rain. Lows near 45, winds out of the east-southeast at 5 to 10 miles per hour. And we are currently under a wind advisory. And right now it doesn't show up on our local forecast, but the region is under a wind advisory. Steady rain tomorrow in the morning, showers continuing in the afternoon, highs in the low 50s. Winds will then be light and variable. Looks like pollen is rated as none here in Rogue River proper. The air quality index for the region is in the good range. Looks like pollen is rated as none here in Rogue River proper. The air quality index is in the moderate range at 53 parts per million. We had been under an air stagnation warning. Now we're under a wind warning, but it hasn't scoured quite yet. Our daytime UV index, though, is low at level 1. Barometric pressure is falling at 29.82 inches. Visibility is down to a quarter mile, and relative humidity is at 100%. Weather from around the world is brought to you by a crowd of crowdsourced weather stations that a crowd crowdsources from around the world, and that is the Weather Underground. London is 53 degrees and cloudy. Paris is 36 degrees and cloudy. Rome is 55 and sunny. Bagram is 38 and clear. Kyiv is 40 degrees and cloudy. Hong Kong is 63 and partly cloudy. Tokyo is 42 degrees and cloudy. Melbourne, Victoria, Australia is 66 degrees with rain showers. San Francisco, California is 51 degrees with rain showers. Chicago, Illinois is 32 and partly cloudy. And New York, New York is 58 degrees Fahrenheit with heavy mist. And that is weather from around the world, brought to you by a crowd of crowdsourced weather stations that a crowd crowdsources from around the world. Lazar Semeny of the Associated Press brings us this first amuse-bouche here at the Chef's Table at West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy, River City Hash Mondays. Albania returned 20 icons to neighboring North Macedonia that were stolen a decade ago. The return marked the final stretch on a long 10-year road with much institutional and international cooperation, said Albania's Culture Minister Elva Margheriti. It also showed Albania's commitment to the fight against trafficking of the cultural inheritance objects, she said. A handover ceremony was held at the National Historic Museum in the Albanian capital of Tirana. No further details were provided about the icons. Later, the cargo arrived at the National Museum in North Macedonia's capital, Skopje. I don't know if that's how it's pronounced, I apologize, where they were unpacked and briefly presented to the public. They will be kept for up to 45 days in a special chamber to avoid damage from atmospheric pressure changes, after which experts will start their restoration. North Macedonia's Prime Minister and head of the Orthodox Church also joined the ceremony. In 2013, Albania authorities in Tirana seized more than 1,000 stolen religious and secular pieces of art dating from the 15th to the mid-20th century and arrested 2 men suspected of planning to sell them abroad. The icons, frescoes, and other pieces were taken from churches and cultural centers in southeastern Albania and in the neighboring North Macedonia. In 2013, North Macedonian experts recognized the icons when Albanian television stations broadcast Albanian Prime Minister Edi Rama inspecting icons seized by police. Skopje officially put in a request for the return in 2018. Many icons and other artworks in Albania are believed to have been looted from churches and other places, especially during the anarchy of 1997 in Albania, when many in the country, among some of the continent's poorest people, lost their life savings in failed pyramid schemes.
Je te donne ce mon amour pour la vie entière, la promesse de me trouver à tes genoux. Aussitôt que tu m'appelles, rester toujours fidèle, c'est tout, c'est tout. Je te donne tous mes printemps, mes étés de mer, mes automnes quand les feuilles tombent partout. Si ce n'est pas une bonne affaire, je te donne tous mes hivers.
Maysoon Khan and Sofeng Cheng of the Associated Press brings us this final amuse-bouche here at the chef's table at West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. Cambodia has welcomed the announcement that New York's Metropolitan Museum of Art will return more than a dozen pieces of ancient artwork to Cambodia and Thailand that were tied to an art dealer and collector accused of running a huge antiquities trafficking network out of Southeast Asia. 14 Khmer sculptures will be returned to Cambodia and two will be returned to Thailand, the Manhattan Museum announced, though no specific timeline was given. The repatriation of the ancient pieces was linked to a well-known art dealer, Douglas Latchford, who was indicted in 2019 for orchestrating a multi-year scheme to sell looted Cambodian antiquities on the international art market. Latchford, who died the following year, had denied any involvement in smuggling. The museum initially cooperated with the U.S. Attorney's Office in Manhattan and the New York Office of Homeland Security investigations on the return of 13 sculptures tied to Latchford before determining there were 3 more that should be repatriated. This isn't the first time the museum has repatriated art linked to Latchford. In 2013, it returned 2 objects to Cambodia. Well, that brings us to the end of our broadcast period for the day, but you do know Netroots Radio broadcasts on, and we will meet up here tomorrow for Tarrytown Chowder Tuesdays, so do stay tuned to Netroots Radio all day and all night for all the breaking news as it breaks, and we will meet up here tomorrow, right here in West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. Bon appetit.
Je voudrais du soleil vert, des dentelles et des théières, des photos de bord de mer, dans mon jardin d'hiver. Je voudrais de la lumière, comme en Nouvelle-Angleterre. Je veux changer d'atmosphère, dans mon jardin d'hiver. Robe à fleurs, sous la pluie de novembre, tes mains qui courent, je n'en peux plus de t'attendre. Les années passent, qu'il est loin, là je tombe. Nul ne peut nous entendre. Je voudrais du Fred Astaire, revoir un latte Goël. Je voudrais toujours te plaire dans mon jardin d'hiver. Je veux déjeuner par terre, comme au long de golfe clair, t'embrasser les yeux ouverts dans mon jardin d'hiver. Pluie de novembre, tes mains qui courent, je n'en peux plus de t'attendre. Les années passent, il est loin, là je tombe. Nul ne peut nous entendre. Ba-da-da-dum-di-da-dum. 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 Dans mon jardin d'hiver. Ba-da-da-dum-di-da-dum. 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 Dans mon jardin d'hiver. Dans mon jardin d'hiver. Dans mon jardin d'hiver.